Hey everyone, and welcome to our November live event with National Sewing Circle. Once again, we have Nicki LaFoille here to answer all of your sewing questions. Thanks for being here, Nicki.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining.
All right, so for the next hour, we're going to be answering as many of your sewing questions as we possibly can. A lot of these are submitted ahead of time, but if you're watching live and you have a question, enter that into the comment box below and we will answer your questions live as well. So we're going to get started here, and our first question is from Angel. And she says, what is the best way to take up a hem when you live on your own?
So a lot of times, yes, when the instructions of a pattern tell you to mark up your hem, it says using a friend, stand in front of a mirror and have them help you mark up your hem. Because if you're standing in your skirt or your dress and you bend down to pin up your hem, that's going to push fabric down further, and you won't get your hem where you want it to. It won't be accurate. So if you live alone, they do make a tool that is called, I pulled it up here, the Dritz Deluxe Chalk Hem Marker. So it's on a little stand that you set on the floor, and it's got an adjustable chalk thing on it that you can adjust to the height that you want your hem to be. And it's got a little squeeze bulb that it'll blow chalk onto your skirt or dress to mark where you want your hem to be. So you can set that, stand in front of a mirror with your chalk hem marker next to you and adjust it to the height that you want it to be, the height that you want your hem up off of the floor, and squeeze the little bulb and turn in a circle to get that hem marked all the way around. And you can also, if you don't want to buy an extra tool, you can fold up your hem and pin it in place and look at yourself in the mirror and see if that is where you want your hem to be, or just kind of adjust it that way. If you look at yourself in the mirror and think you want it a little bit lower, unpin it, pull it down 1/4 inch, pin it again, and look, and just trial and error to get it that way. And of course, once you take it off, you want to make sure that all of the pins are, the hem is nice and even, and the pins are even. Because I know a lot of times when you're pinning something on yourself, your pins aren't going to be even all the way around. So just making sure it's even that way. So you can do it trial and error as well.
Absolutely. All right, our next question here is from Colleen, and she wants to know, is it possible to take an old garment like a nurse's jacket and cut it apart to make a new one from it by adding correct seam allowances, facings, anything that you need to add like that?
Absolutely. You can take anything apart and just treat that expanse of fabric as just any kind of fabric that you buy from the store. It's just a block of fabric. You can cut off the seams of the garment, or to add, give yourself a little bit extra space on the chunk of fabric. You can rip open the seams and press those seams flat, and that gives you a little bit extra that you can use for placing your new pattern pieces on that piece of fabric. So yeah, open up your seams and just reuse it. Move your pattern pieces on that extra chunk of fabric, and it's good for recycling.
Well, so, and you could also, just in case, I'm not sure if I understood the question right, I was thinking she was going to take it apart and use that as like a pattern piece. You can do that too, right?
Oh, yeah, yep, absolutely. Just keeping in mind where the seams were placed, so your seam allowances, making sure when you cut your new pattern out that you're going to be stitching it with the same depth of seam allowance. So, but yes, yeah, I misunderstood that question.
I didn't really know which way she meant it, so either way, we got it covered.
Either way, the answer is yes.
Okay. Our next question here is from Shirley, and she wants to design a pattern according to her own measurements, but needs to know how much ease to add to the pattern. She says she did this years ago and got a perfect skin-tight fit. She could hardly move. So she wants to know how much ease to add in there.
Yes, if you make a garment directly to your measurements, it is going to be like a second skin, and you don't have any room to move. So yeah, you want to build in ease. So there are two types of ease. There's wearing ease and there's design ease. So wearing ease is just as much room as you need to move, to twist, bend, and design ease is a lot of times added for silhouette, for the look. So I know in the last couple of years, the more baggy type shirts have been popular. So that's a very loose fit garment. So there's a lot of ease built in there. But for just general wearing ease, pattern companies a lot of times will have charts on their websites, not on the back of the pattern usually, but on their website, they have, I know McCall's has a chart that will tell you how much ease they have built into their patterns. So let me pull that up. So for a close fitting garment, there's anywhere up to 2 7/8 inch of ease built in. So if you take your body measurement and then add 2 7/8 of an inch, that's how much extra room you have in any given area. For a fitted silhouette, so slightly gives you some ease, but it's still pretty contoured to your body. For dresses and tops, there is 3 to 4 inches of ease. And then for jackets and coats, obviously there would be more ease, anywhere from 5 to 6 inches of ease in all, parts of the pattern. A semi-fitted silhouette is going to be even looser, so you'll have anywhere from 4 1/8 of an inch to 5 inches of ease in dresses and tops. And for skirts and pants, the ease is mostly around the hip area, because that's that's the area of the garment where you need extra room for sitting, just room for your body to move. So for skirts and pants, for a fitted look, anywhere up to 1 7/8 of an inch of ease in the hip area. And then, you get progressively more and more ease built in. So for a loose fitting dress or a top, it's kind of a wide range, anywhere from 5 1/8 to 8 inches of ease built in. So for a place to start adding ease, I would say between a fitted or a semi-fitted look, I would build in maybe 4 inches of ease in any given area of the pattern, and make a muslin and see if you like that, if you want a looser fit, either for functionality or for design, and go from there.
Yeah, and I would probably recommend even going, I guess, more than you think you need, because you can always take it in, once you put it on and take it in, versus trying to add something to it.
Definitely.
All right, our next question here is from Diane, and she says, I have been away from sewing many years. How do I find and fit a sewing pattern?
Sewing patterns are everywhere. You can find them at the fabric store, but you can go online and find a million patterns, not only from the big companies like McCall's and Simplicity and Butterick, but there are a lot of independent pattern companies out there as well. Excuse me. And they have at the pattern, or at fabric stores and craft stores, they have those pattern catalogs. So the big hardcover books, that's the catalog of all the patterns that the company has. You can look through there and see, find all of the blouse patterns that they have, and then all the pants patterns that they have. They're organized like that. So you can go through and look at the pictures of the finished products, and then either buy them at the store or order them online. And there's a ton out there. And as far as fitting a sewing pattern, they have the size chart on the back of the pattern envelope that will tell you what size pattern to cut out. So take your measurements and compare it to the chart on the back of the pattern envelope, and cut out the pattern that most closely matches your bust measurement, because all other areas of a pattern are easier to fit than the bust and the arm's eye area. And you would want to round up. So if your bust was a 37 inches and one size was a 36-inch bust and the next size up was 38 inch, you'd want to round up and cut the larger size. And after you find the size of the pattern that you want to cut out, there will be other alterations to make. So I always recommend making a muslin fitting sample first to see what areas you need to do some alterations to. So it's not straight out of the package. You're not going to, the pattern is not going to fit you perfectly, probably. Chances are you will need to do some more alterations to it. So kind of go into it expecting that.
Perfect. This question kind of goes along with what you're talking about. And this is from Denise. She says, because I am a large waist and not very broad around the shoulder area, I have difficulty cutting out patterns. I usually end up with the waist being right, but the top half is nearly always baggy. What can I do to perfect this? So aside from making a muslin, you can grade between pattern pieces?
Yes, you definitely can. So if you're petite in the shoulder, you can start with, say, a size 8 in the shoulders and grade out to, say, a size 10 at the waist and the hips. It's just a matter of taking a pencil and drawing in between those solid black pattern lines, trying to try to mimic the curve. If there's a curve in the pattern, you want to try to mimic that as much as you can and do a gentle grade in between those size lines. But also, I would say if you start out with the pattern size that fits your shoulders, adjustments to the waist are a lot easier to make than adjustments to shoulders and arm size and the bust area. So if you can cut out your pattern a little bit smaller and then take the size lines from the underarm and bring them out a little bit more, then that would give you some extra room if you are narrower in the shoulder and a little bit larger toward the middle and the bottom. So adjustments to waistlines of patterns are a lot easier to do. So I would start there.
All right, even though you said to avoid the shoulder alterations, we have a question about a shoulder alteration. So we're going to do that one next. This is from Jean, and she wants to know how she can alter a seam that is 2 inches past her shoulder. She wants the seam to be at her shoulder, not hanging past it.
That's a pretty common alteration. Yeah, sometimes you just can't avoid alterations to those areas. You want to avoid them when you can, but sometimes they're unavoidable. So if your shoulder seam is hanging further off your shoulder, you want it to sit right at this bone. It's pretty easy, actually, to just shorten up this shoulder seam. So here's my poorly drawn bodice. So here's your shoulder seam, and if it's hanging too far out this way, it's pretty easy to just bring that in. So draw your new either pin fit the pattern on yourself or make a muslin sample and mark where you want that seam to end. Transfer that onto the pattern and then simply true that mark back into the arm's eye, kind of using a gentle curve. Just draw that back in to the arm's eye curve. So there would be my new line. And that is going to alter it might alter the shape and the size of the arm's eye a little bit. So measure the original arm's eye length and then measure the new arm's eye length. And if it is more than 3/4 of an inch different, you may want to make an alteration to the sleeve caps to make sure that that would still fit in there. But that alteration probably isn't going to change the arm's eye length that much. So you probably won't have to do anything to the sleeve cap, but make sure whatever you do to the front bodice, you do to the back bodice as well to make sure those shoulder seams will match up.
Perfect. All right, our next question here, this is from Patricia. She says she has a 2-piece formal. The top wraps around with hooks to attach the back together. The top is too tight and she can't get it to attach the hooks together. It's made out of lace and cotton lining, and she wants to know how she can extend the back to make it bigger so it will fit.
You could try to find a lace that is similar and simply attach it to each end of the hook and the eyes, to extend each of those to make them a little bit extra in the back. Lace is pretty easily matched if you can find the right color. Color is the hardest part to match, but as far as pattern of lace, it kind of blends together. So finding a similar pattern would be enough. You don't have to find the exact pattern of lace. So you could do that, just extend each part of the back to give yourself a little bit extra room. Or you could go the complete opposite way and do a contrasting color to make it look like it was a purposeful design detail. So if you've got your, say, ivory lace, do either a red lace to have a little pop of color, or even a solid fabric to make it look like it was a design detail. But laces are pretty easily matched. There's a lot of choices for laces out there. So that is what's coming to mind. That's what I would do. I would try to match the lace and just extend each part of the back.
If you didn't need to do it by that much, could you take it out at the side seam too? I mean, there may be, I don't know, if you only needed like a tiny amount, you might be able to get a little bit.
Yeah, yep. You could take out the side seams, and that would give you probably up to a half inch, probably.
Yeah.
If you took out the side seam, you know, an eighth of an inch, that would give you an extra half inch. So yeah, that's a good call. You could take it out at the side seam, or if there's any other seaming in there, you could take it out of those seams as well. If there's a princess seam, and try letting it out in the middle of the garment as well. Good call.
Absolutely. All right, our next question here is from Jean. Oh, we just asked that one. I'm so sorry. The next one here is from Eva, and she says, I have some blue jeans and the legs are too wide. How do I fix them?
So for blue jeans, there's some amount of deconstructing you will have to do to take in those seams. So instead of taking your side seam and simply, starting from the bottom of the hem and going up, it's kind of hard to sew through this hem. It's got so many layers of denim, and you want to make sure that it would be hard to match, this top stitching to get it to perfectly match if you're taking that in a little bit. So I would recommend taking out the hem at the side seam. So you want to do as much as you can to the outer seam. That's usually the easiest part to alter, but sometimes the side seam will have a flat felled seam, which you can take that apart as well, and you can see how that's formed. Usually flat felled seams are formed by stitching with the wrong sides together and then folding over the seam allowance and top stitching. Excuse me. So you can go that route if you've got a flat felled seam. This one does not. It doesn't even have any top stitching, so that's the easiest one to work with. But I would start by taking out the hem on the bottom, just about a couple of inches on each side of the side seam, and unfolding that. And you want to get some heavyweight thread that matches your top stitching so that you can go back over that when you're finished. Either jeans thread or top stitching thread, or just heavy thread usually is the correct weight. So you can unfold that hem, pin that out as much as you want to, and keeping in mind that the back of the jeans, the back is going to be wider than the front. So you want to maintain that. Allow the back to be wider than the front. So take out as much as you need to from the side seam, taper that from the bottom, taper it up into the original seam, using that kind of true it back out to zero using a gentle curve. And then it's pretty easy to fold the hem back up and stitch that back with your top stitching thread. On this side, this is my inner seam that is flat felled. And you can do the same thing with that if you're taking a lot. So if you're trying to go from a bell bottom to a skinny jean, you can't take it all out of one side. You're going to have to split the difference and bring it in from both sides. So if you've got a flat felled seam, you are going to have to do a lot of unstitching, unpicking, pick that seam out. And do the same thing as on the other side. Take it in evenly on the front and back, making sure that you don't take more out of the back than the front, because you want to make sure the back of the jeans is still wider than the front. So when you unpick the seam, you'll be able to see how that flat felled seam is constructed. And when you stitch it back up, just kind of do it in reverse as when you took it out. Fold that how it was constructed, and finish the top stitching, trying to match that thread color and just reconstruct the seam after you take out as much as is desired for either fit or design. So without actually taking it apart, it's kind of hard to demonstrate, but hopefully that helped a little bit. So there's a lot of deconstructing to be done, and you can see how it was constructed. And
Absolutely. And I think like you said, once you take it apart, it's a little easier to see what you're working with. And I like how you call it unstitching rather than ripping. It makes it sound a little more fun.
Yeah, less disheartening.
Right. And then, of course, if you need a visual on how to do a flat felled seam, we do have a video tutorial on how to do that on our website, so you can check that out there as well if you want to see how to do that. All right, our next question here is from Shirley, and she says she cannot see well enough to thread her sewing machine. She's tried several types of threaders, and they didn't quite work well. So do you have maybe a brand that you use or something that does the trick for you for threading needles?
Yes, there is a needle threader that Drit makes that has a light built into it. So it's this little green thing with the standard, needle threading loop, but you can press the button and have that LED light shine directly on the needle where you're trying to thread it. So I've found that really helpful. If anybody else has any other suggestions of things that they use, please type them in the comments so we can share the knowledge. But that would be my suggestion.
Absolutely. I have to say, I'm a fan of using the needle threaders that aren't on the machine, like the ones that you can actually buy separately. You put through and put your thread through and then pull back through. I think those work better. I've yet to work a needle threader on my machine.
Yeah.
All right, our next question here is from Connie. She says, no matter what I try or what I do with refilling my bobbin, I always have a clump of thread at the beginning of sewing. Is this a winding the bobbin thread issue or something else? Her machine is only 2 years old, and she's tried everything she can think of.
I would say that is not a winding the bobbin issue, but rather a seaming issue. So a lot of times when you start a seam, especially if you're working with lighter weight fabrics, the feed dogs and the foot and the needle and the thread, they may have a hard time grabbing onto the fabric. And if that lightweight fabric gets pushed down into the throat plate, when the next stitch goes to form, it's got, some fabric in there and it's not going to form the stitch nicely. So you're going to get a clump, and then it's not going to be feeding through under the foot. So it's going to just exacerbate the problem, and you're going to get a nice big nest of threads. So you can try a couple of different things. You can try starting your seam just a little bit in from the very edge of the fabric. And sometimes that will just give all the working parts of the sewing machine enough to grab onto to start pulling that fabric under the presser foot and give you a nicer start to your seam. You can also try putting some tissue paper or tearaway stabilizer under the start of your seam to stabilize the fabric, give it a little something to grab onto. You can try starting your seam on a bit of like a scrap of fabric, and butt your actual fabric up to the end of that. So you start it on, you know, your starter scrap piece. Get that yucky thread nest out of the way if that still happens, and then continue your seam onto your actual project. Sorry, give me your suggestion too, Ashley.
Well, I was gonna say, because this, I was sewing this afternoon and this just happened to me, and so since she said it's right after winding her bobbin, so my bobbin, when you wind it, you have to click it over to wind, and then it clicks back when you're done. And if it's not completely clicked back, as soon as you start sewing, it will click it back automatically, and it makes the bobbin spin really fast, and that gave me a clump. So if it's only happening like immediately after you've wound your bobbin, just make sure that's all the way back over. So just a coincidence that happened today, but that could be it too. I don't know.
That's a good suggestion. Also, one last thing, if none of those are working for you, even if your seam looks like it is balanced, both your needle tension and your thread needle tension and your bobbin tension may be too loose, or it may not all be working together properly. So you can mess with your tension a little bit. If just your needle tension is too loose as well, that means it's not pulling the bobbin thread up enough. So if the bobbin thread is still sort of below your fabric layers and the next stitch goes to form, you've got more kind of gunk happening under your fabric, and that can cause balled up thread as well. So playing with your tension settings as well. She said she tried everything, so that was probably on the list of things that you tried, but I feel like I have to mention it.
I feel like if we have people that have watched so say how long we've been doing these, if you watch, we know that you adjust your tension, and we know that you have as much tissue paper in your sewing room as fabric. So we're learning things about you.
If you have a problem, just throw some tissue paper on it.
It usually works though, so it
does help.
All right, our next question here is from Linda, and she says she recently tried doing embroidery on genuine leather. She tried different needles, but all she was able to achieve was cutting the leather, leaving the embroidery unattached in many places. She also used various different stabilizers and spray adhesives. Nothing was really working, so she wants to know if you have any advice for her.
Yes, so embroidering on leather is tricky, so kudos for trying it. The main thing that you want to look out for is the type of design that you choose. So all the stabilizer in the world isn't going to help if you choose a really thick, dense design. It's just going to perforate the edges of the leather, and you're going to end up with a hole cut out of your leather. Since leather does not act like normal fabric, when you're embroidering on a woven fabric or even a knit fabric, the needle is going to go in between the fibers, and with leather, once you make a hole in leather, once your needle passes through the leather, that hole is there, and it's just kind of cutting through the leather. So you want to make sure that you are using a leather that is not too thick. So something more mid-weight is more pliable and easier to work with. And your design. So you want to make sure your design is a more open, kind of almost line work design. Some fill stitches are fine, but you want to make sure that any underlay stitches, you don't want those underlay stitches to go directly to the edge of the design, because the more times the needle pierces along the edge of the design, the more it's going to perforate that perimeter and weaken it, and bad news. So eliminate some underlay stitches if you can, or just make sure that they don't go all the way to the edge. Keeping it, like I said, more of an open design will help a lot in that. So design selection is very, very important. And if you can even find a design that is digitized for leather, you can even try searching that in your search bar, embroidered design for leather. That would be ideal, because digitizers will know what considerations need to be made for leather.
This is probably going to be throwing you a curveball here because I'm going to ask you to remember something from years ago, but because we both used to work at Creative Machine Embroidery Magazine, and I remember there was a designer who, I think it was a pair of sisters, and they did designs that were very open, and I can't remember their name, and I'm not sure if you can either, but that might be something that would work.
Was it Momodini?
Yes, I believe that was it.
Yeah. Momodini designs are not only might be good for leather, but just gorgeous in general.
Yes.
Momodini, possibly. Let me Google that. Yeah, Momodi embroidery. It's Momodini embroidery art. So yeah, check that out. That might be good. I remember their designs were very open and very artistic too, very beautiful. So yeah, good for
Just
wow.
Just one of those random things you just remember are weird. Just a follow-up question to that. When you're doing embroidery on something as heavy as leather, do you really even need a stabilizer?
No, leather wouldn't need to be stabilized, but I would still want to hoop some stabilizer since I wouldn't want to hoop the leather. So the stabilizer is just your base for hooping, and then you can lay your leather on top of that stabilizer. And it also protects the inner workings of your machine from anything that might be falling off of the leather as your needle is piercing it. Also, that was a reminder to me, if you choose a design for your leather, test stitch it out onto some tearaway stabilizer, and that would be a good indication to you. If you stitch it out on tearaway stabilizer and it just tears right off of the stabilizer, that's probably perforating too much. It's probably too dense because the tearaway stabilizer is going to act kind of like leather, since your needle passes through the stabilizer and it just kind of perforates it like it would leather. So that would be a good way to test out designs. Or you can get some inexpensive leather material which acts kind of like leather, and test stitch it out on that to see how it would react.
Absolutely. All right. Since we're on the topic of embroidery here, our next question is about embroidering on suede. And they want to know what precautions they should take when embroidering, and afterwards, if they should put a lining on the back to hide the stitching. It's for a guitar strap.
Cool. Yes. And I think that was a Sherpa back.
Yeah, suede back Sherpa.
Laid back Sherpa, which I've never worked with before, but it looks beautiful. And when embroidering on suede, that's another one that you probably don't want to hoop, since it has a nap, and if you try to hoop it, it'll get what's called hoop burn. So that nap is not going to forgive you for squishing it in between those hoops, and when you unhoop it, you'll be able to see that that oval of hoop. So just hoop the stabilizer and place the fabric on top of it, and either use temporary spray adhesive to adhere it, or pins outside of the embroidery area to adhere that fabric onto the stabilizer so it doesn't shift as you're embroidering. So that's the main thing. I'm not sure how the Sherpa backing would affect the embroidery design, since it's got to have, it's probably got some loft to it. So I don't know if that would affect the stitching out process. But if it does, you could try cutting down the loft of that minky fabric. Just using scissors, kind of give it a haircut, trim out some of that nap away from the embroidery area, so that you don't have all of that bulk trying to get squished between all of those threads that you're laying down. And I would want to put something on the back of it, even if you use thread that matches the fabric. It's still kind of this big messy clump of thread, even if you do everything right. So I would want to put something over the back of it, if not a full lining, then just something over the back to cover, like a little patch to cover up all of those threads.
Perfect. All right, so one more question about embroidery and stabilizers, and this will be all-encompassing, not necessarily about leather or suede or anything, but Joanne just says, when embroidering, is interfacing all the same, or can you go over which ones need to go on top of the fabric and which ones go on the bottom of the fabric?
Yes, I like this question. So when embroidering, there are a lot of different kinds of stabilizers. So the cutaway variety of stabilizer is the heaviest weight. It's thicker, and you want to generally match the weight of your stabilizer to the weight of your fabric so that it marries well. And cutaway stabilizer will remain underneath those design threads forever and ever. You just have to use your scissors and cut away the excess stabilizer from the design perimeter when you're finished. And that stabilizer will stay supporting those threads until the end of time. Tearaway stabilizer is slightly more lightweight. And as the name suggests, it will tear away from the perimeter of the design once you're finished. And that stabilizer will also stay between the thread and the fabric forever. Water-soluble stabilizer comes in a fabric type, and it also comes in a film type variety. So the fabric type, you will hoop in the hoop and then stitch your design out, and once you wash the garment or whatever, or take a wet cloth and put it over the design, that stabilizer will dissolve and disappear. So that's good for lighter weight fabrics. And all of these stabilizers are going to go on the back of your fabric. There is a heat removable stabilizer as well that generally only comes in the film variety. So the more film variety stabilizers are good for floating over the top of the design, so on the right side of the fabric. And that serves to kind of hold the threads up from the fabric a little bit. So it's good for using with fabrics that have a loft, so terry cloth towels or something with a nap like suede, possibly. So that will kind of lift the threads up so that they don't sink into the loft of the fabric that you're embroidering on. And heat removable stabilizer, you would hit with an iron, and that will disappear after you stitch the design as well. So that would go away from underneath the threads. So you can, you would a lot of times pair a lighter weight film with, the stabilizer that you're hooping. So if you were embroidering a towel, you may do a layer of stabilizer hooped with the towel, and then your wash away film type variety on top to keep the threads from sinking into the pile. Did I cover everything? That kind of got away from me, I feel like.
Well, you covered a stabilizer I didn't know existed, the heat one, so that's
okay. So yeah, the main thing is to match the stabilizer that's going on the wrong side of the fabric with the fabric weight. So if you try to do a heavyweight stabilizer with a lightweight fabric, it's going to just be, clunky, and it's going to pull weird. And if you have a heavier weight fabric and a lighter weight stabilizer, it's not going to stabilize it. Really, not really going to do anything for you. So match those weights. And
so if you're unfamiliar with a stabilizer and you just grab one, it's safe to say put it on the back of your fabric, right?
Yes. Yep. They're only in special circumstances are you going to want to do something on the right side, and it's generally when you have a loft. If you're embroidering something with nap, velvet, suede, minky, terry cloth.
All those nice, plush, lovely fabrics. All right, our next question here is from Tina, and she says, is a walking foot necessary for sewing garments to help keep fabrics sewing evenly?
No, it is not. I do not own a walking foot. I know. What shame.
How do you even do that? They come with most machines.
It did not come with my lightweight brother. But No, I do not. I don't have a walking foot, and I sew garments all the time. If you're careful, you don't need anything extra. Although I was sewing satin one time, and I really wished I had a walking foot because it was like sliding everywhere. And a lot of times with knits too, a walking foot is really helpful. But when I was sewing satin, I just used water soluble, double sided, usable adhesive to kind of baste those seams together first before I stitched them so that they wouldn't slip around on me. So it's an extra step. Using a walking foot would have been easier, but I didn't have one. There are ways to get around it, but in general, I don't find I have a problem with keeping my fabrics even.
I hear if you have satins or silk slipping around, you can put tissue paper or something in between them, right?
Who told you that?
I have to say I have a walking foot, but I do a lot of quilting too, so that's generally where I use my walking foot. So I second that it's not 100% necessary.
Yeah.
All right, our next question here is from Constance, and she says she's going to be making flannel blankets for the local NICU, and they are going to be 30 by 36 inches. She received some beautiful soft velour blankets as donations that she's going to cut down, and she wants to know what the best way to finish the blankets would be. Bias tape, satin binding, serging the edges.
Well, that is an excellent project. Good for you for doing that and donating those. The easiest and quickest would definitely be serging the edges, and I think that everyone who receives those blankets will still be thrilled to get them. It doesn't need to be, super done up. But if you have a little bit of extra time, I like binding edges of things like that. Satin blanket binding is kind of tough to work with, I have found. So that might be more trouble than it's worth. I know it's beautiful when it's done correctly, but it can be tough to manipulate in the satin. It's slippery and it can ripple and all these things. So binding with just whatever cotton, a matching or contrasting cotton would be kind of a nice touch, but also serging is probably easiest and most time effective.
Absolutely. All right, our next question here is about binding, since we were talking about that. And Joanne wants to know if binding always has to be cut on the bias.
No, it does not. So they like cutting bias on the binding when you have an edge that you're binding that is a curve. So the bias of the strip allows it to bend with that curved seam and turn over the edge to encase those edges. But if you're binding something that has straight edges, like a square pot holder or a trivet or a quilt or a rectangular table runner, all those edges are straight. There's no curve that you need the bias to stretch around and manipulate around. So you could absolutely cut those strips on the straight grain. Either the lengthwise or the crosswise grain is probably fine in those circumstances. And it will it'll bind those edges just fine, since you don't really need to manipulate them around any curves or anything. So that's an instance where it would not have to be on the bias.
And I actually think it's even easier sometimes to make it on the straight grain when you're going to be sewing straight, because then it won't, skew while you're sewing.
Right. Yeah, that bias grain will sometimes warp on you. So yeah, definitely keeping everything straight.
All right. Well, speaking of things that can stretch, someone asked if you can sew stretch fabrics with a straight needle on your sewing machine.
Yes. So if the seam that you're sewing is not going to be stretched, you can use a straight needle sewing machine or a straight stitch on your machine. If it's, if you're making a knit scarf or something that you're not, anything that you don't need to stretch, like over your head or over your shoulders or over your hips. Say if it's like a vertical seam or a shirt that's one of those really loose fitting shirts That's not going to need to stretch at all. That would be fine. But as soon as you put any stretch on that seam, a straight stitch is going to pop. So just make extra sure that it's not a seam that's going to need any stretch. And yeah, you can definitely use a straight stitch for stitching knit fabrics.
Absolutely. And no matter what stitch you're doing, do you always have to use a special needle when you're sewing on stretchy fabrics?
It is a good idea to use a ballpoint needle when stitching knit fabrics. It will help you avoid skipped stitches simply because it's made for that type of fabric. So a ballpoint needle or a jersey needle or a stretch needle. Those are all kind of constructed in the same way. Those are all good choices for when you are stitching on knit fabric. So if you're having tension issues or skip stitches, try to make sure you've got one of those needles, and it'll also help not only help your seam form correctly, but it will help preserve your fabric as well. If you're using a sharp pointed universal needle, it may tear the fibers of your knit fabric, whereas a needle that is constructed for knit fabric is going to kind of nestle in between the ribs, in between the loops of the knit fabric, instead of cutting through them.
Perfect. All right. Our next question here, and I know it requires you to do just a little bit of a setup there with your camera, but Helen says, nobody has ever shown me how to thread a sewing machine. Can you help me? I'm sure once I know that part, I will learn really quickly.
Yes, that is the first step in learning how to sew. So I will do my best. If you have a manual for your machine, all manuals should have a diagram or instructions on how to thread your particular machine. So check that out. You can even type into your search bar online on your browser here, type in your model number and threading. And that will hopefully bring up a diagram for your particular machine. Since some machines look a little bit different, it's the same general threading technique, but sometimes it can look a little different. And if you're looking at a diagram for your model, it can be a little bit easier to learn. But this one, so this is my grandmother-in-law's beautiful Viking machine. So the thread spool is back here. It's kind of hidden behind on this one. So you've got your thread spool on there, and you're going to bring the thread across, and there's going to be your first point over here that you're going to loop your thread through. Let's get a closer look at that if we can. So there's that first little notch that you're going to loop your thread through. And then it's going to, from there, come down to the right of, there's going to be this little metal flange here. It's going to come down to the right of that. And underneath, it's going to hook down around that and come back up. And there's this, another little latch point here. That's what moves. You can hopefully see that moving. So you're going to hook your thread through that and then come back down. And a lot of times there will be a little bar here to hook your thread through. If it's not there, it'll be right up above the needle. Hook your thread through and then thread that through your needle eye. So it's the same general configuration on most sewing machines. Over, down, up, and then back down. And some machines even have helpful arrows, but those that don't, check your manual to be sure that you're threading correctly, because threading incorrectly is the #1 cause of tension issues. So you want to make sure that that is done correctly. So hopefully that little demo may have helped even for other models. And on mine is a brother at home. On this first latch point here, my brother has a little, it looks like a metal button on top of that, but that is for threading the bobbin. So you don't want to thread your needle thread through that. There's a separate little hook for threading when you're threading the needle.
Absolutely. I mean, I have a brother at home, or I am at home. I have a brother as well, and it has the thread pass, and it shows two different thread paths, one for winding a bobbin and one for sewing. So if they're marked and there's more than one line going, then one is probably for the needle and one for the bobbin.
Exactly.
Perfect. All right, we just got a question here from Dee, and she wants to know what a recommended elastic is for swimwear.
Elastic for swimwear, they make the clear, like plasticky kind of elastic. So it's not braided, it's not knit, it's not woven elastic, because those are all sort of fabricy. And the chlorine is going to erode that, and it's going to add weight to your swimsuit, which you don't want. So I recommend that clear elastic. It's very, very stretchy, it's strong, and it won't add weight to your suit, and it won't be eroded by chlorine. Some elastics in the store may also be labeled swimwear, so those would be a good bet as well, but that would be my suggestion.
Perfect. All right, we have a couple questions that have come in, and I know you get this question pretty much every month, but someone wants to know about buying a new sewing machine and what your recommendations are for brands, features that you like, things you can't live without. What would you recommend?
Yes, that's a tough question, because it's also subjective about what you are looking for and what projects you are going to be making. So I always recommend shopping around. You can go online and look at different models. So go on singer.com, brother-usa.com, and you can look at, Baby Lock, Juki, Husqvarna Viking, all the different brands. They all have websites. So you can even type into the search bar, if you don't know the website, type in Baby Lock sewing machines, and their website will be the first to come up. So you can shop around all the different models that they offer on their website, and it'll tell you all the features that they have. So if you're a quilter, you might want a big, opening between the arm of the sewing machine so that you can get your quilts through. As a garment sewer, I didn't need a lot in my sewing machine, just a buttonholes and decorative stitches, and I was able to get a relatively inexpensive machine that does everything that I need it to. The Brother CS 6000i was the top rated sewing machine on Amazon. So I went to Amazon to look up reviews, and it was the top rated because it was so inexpensive. People were happy to be able to buy one and not have to invest a lot in it. And it hasn't caused me any problems yet. Fingers crossed, it's working fine. So if you're just starting out, that one was maybe $250 or something. It was pretty inexpensive. On some of the sewing machine company websites, some of them don't have prices on their websites, which is a little bit frustrating. So you will have to either go to a dealer or call a dealer to get an idea of prices. But it's good to go to a dealer anyway, because you can test them, and you can talk to a dealer and get their take on it, on what models are the best sellers and things like that. So sitting down in front of a machine and testing it out is pretty helpful in, kind of figuring out not only how to use it, because you have a teacher in the dealer right there, just kind of show you some of the things, but it also will show you how it's going to run when you get it home. So shop around. You want to decide what you want before you go shopping. Decide if you want to be able to graduate up to embroidery, or decide if you want to be able to stitch leather bags in the future, because you'll want something a little heavier duty for that. So think about your priorities and what features you really want. Make a list before you go. have a clear idea of what you're looking for, and shop around. It's not something that it is kind of an investment, so there's no need to really rush into it. You want to make sure you get something that you're going to be happy with.
Absolutely, and I have a friend who always says that to buy from a dealer, because you're not only buying the machine, but you're buying like the support that goes with it. So if you have any problems with it, it's much easier to take a machine right back to a dealer than if you ordered online to call their 1-800 number, whatever their customer service line is. So if you, especially if you're brand new and you know you're going to have a lot of questions about your machine, that's definitely something I'd recommend doing.
Absolutely.
All right, and just because you mentioned sewing bags and leather, and you might need a heavier duty machine, we have a question, and they want to know what kind of machine is used for sewing designer bags. So what kind of things would you need for that?
Well, I recently started sewing faux leather bags on my little brother, CS 6000i, and just using a medium weight faux leather, that's about all that machine is going to be able to handle, simply because it is kind of lightweight. If you want to sew genuine leather bags, something a little heavier duty would be necessary, probably. A straight needle sewing machine is a little bit of a different configuration. That's would be for people who want to professionally sew leather bags, because you can sew through like an inch thick of leather on a straight needle sewing machine. It's like it's got an awl on it, so it punches an awl before it punches through with an awl before it creates the stitch. So that is an example of an industrial sewing machine that is capable of doing something heavy duty like that. But some of the more higher end machines, so generally the more expensive you go, the heavier duty it's going to be, and the more it's going to be capable of sewing. So if you want to sew designer handbags, it's less of what machine you use and more of the techniques that you use. So unless you can't really sew designer leather handbags on one of those tiny little travel machines either. So you want something that's a little bit not, you don't necessarily need a high-end machine for it, but probably not my $200 brother machine that is not going to be capable of sewing heavyweight leather. So something kind of middle of the road machine will most likely be able to handle some heavier duty fabrics, more specialty fabrics. But I would say it's definitely more of the skill and techniques. So that would be more important to being able to sew designer style bags than the machine.
So I don't know if this is even something that you can answer, but is there a way to know whether your machine is going to be able to sew through the leather, like before you buy that leather or before you buy the machine? Is there something to look for where it would say like can sew or through this, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, some machines will boast that. If they're like more industrial type machines, they will say that can sew through 6 layers of denim or something like that. But if they don't, there's not really anything that you can look for short of trying it out. So you can test it out at the dealer, bring some fabric to sew through. It's the dealers aren't gonna look twice at you if you bring some fabric to test stitch on. If you know you're going to be sewing lots of jeans or lots of handbags or boots or something, something kind of specialty, bring something like that to test, and the dealers are going to understand you want something that you're going to be happy with. So yeah, unfortunately there's not like a feature that I can say look for this and you're getting a heavy duty machine. A lot of it's testing it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just another good reason to go to a dealer, because you can test it out versus just, reading reviews or something that may or may not be as helpful. But so go to your dealer, try them out, and find the perfect machine for whatever it is you want to sell. Perfect. All right. I want to thank you so much for being here tonight, Nicki, and thank everyone for submitting their questions beforehand and everyone who participated with us tonight. We hope you will join us again next month for more insight from Nicki. So submit your questions ahead of time and she'll start prepping for next month. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.